welcome to another episode of That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. I'm Kelly, and my co-host is Mr. James. What's happening, dude?
How you doing? Good to be here with you, my friend, as always, from the corner studio at
the That's Some Crazy Shit Center location.
Right on.
Something like that. And you're in the corner studio.
Always the corner studio.
Always
they
the
treat
corner
you
studio.
good that way.
That's cool. Well, I am not in the corner studio. However, I am here to tell you that we have a guest. And this guest, I like when guests come back. So this guest was on before, and he had so much fun with us talking about dowsing that he wanted to come back and talk about it again. James, Charlie Sheldon is our guest today.
I know, I was excited because I was familiar with dowsing before we talked to Charlie. And since I had the opportunity to try dowsing at a ghost investigation, so I was excited to talk to Charlie about it.
Yeah, and so he was actually on back in season 4, episode 9, if you want to check him out. And he was really talking about he's also an author as well, so he had put out some books, and but he wanted to come back and share some more dowsing stories with us, and so he's our guest today, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's do this.
All right,
yeah, let's do it.
Welcome to the podcast, Dowser. Is it Dowser?
Dowser and author.
Dowser and author Charlie Sheldon.
Hi, Charlie. How are you? Welcome back
Great.
to That's Some Crazy Shit.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Good. Last time you were here, we talked about dowsing rods,
Right.
and you talked about your books. And so what have you been up to since the last time we talked to you?
I think since the last time we talked, I got my 3rd book out, and it's now in bookstores and available. And I'm resting because it was a lot of work. And so I pushed hard on that right up until maybe a week or 2 ago. And now I've kind of stepped away and taken a break, I guess you could say.
Nice.
Well deserved, I'm sure.
Nice.
So I have to tell you something, Charlie. Since we last spoke, I went on a paranormal ghost investigation.
Oh.
And I got to use dowsing rods.
Oh.
And I thought I immediately thought of you when we went to this place, because they were saying what equipment everyone wanted, and everyone wanted all these EMF meters and all this, and I was like, I want to try the dowsing rods.
Right.
So we go, and I was telling Kelly, it's interesting because it's almost like, I described it like a fish at the end of a fishing pole, just that slightest little tug. You could kind of feel it in the rods.
Were you using the Y-shaped stick or rods that were?
I was using the rods. They didn't have the sticks. I was using the rods, and I was always a little bit skeptical of those because I always thought people could manipulate them with their thumbs.
Right.
And so I purposely made sure that my thumbs were straight up.
Right.
And that they were just kind of sitting in the crook of my finger.
Right.
And you really can feel something. It's interesting.
Did you fight it? Did you try to hold it from turning?
Not at all. That was my whole, I thought, because I really was conscious of that.
Okay.
Because, I didn't want to, because I've seen it on television. I've had people describe it. And I always thought, well, there's a way you could manipulate it if you tried to. But so I was very conscious of that.
Right.
And so now that just intrigued me. Now I need to go find me a willow.
Right. Okay.
And try it with a willow next time I go out.
Well,
but
it works.
I guess this is a long way to ask my question. Have you had any experience with things like that?
Well, yeah, I've the way I started, which I'd said in the earlier discussion we had, but I'd heard about dowsing from my dad when I was a little boy.
Right.
And I think I remember this guy coming to the neighboring lot and using a stick to find water to drill a well. And he found water. Now, let's leave aside the big discussion of whether this really works or not. We could talk about that. But that made a very big impression on me. And then later, when I was, I think, 18 or 19, I was up in the backcountry with these guys, clearing brush under power lines. And one guy said he was a dowser. And I remembered this thing with my dad. And I said, yeah, right. And so he went out and cut a stick, just a Y-shaped stick, and he walked around and the stick pulled down, and I could see that he was struggling to keep the stick from pulling down. And the way you hold these Y-shaped sticks, you hold them with your palms facing up. So the straight stick points up and the Y's point out to the side, and you're holding the stick with your palms facing the sky. And so you walk along with the stick pointing up or maybe pointing a little bit ahead. And then with him, what happened was when he felt the pressure, the stick turned down, and the way it turned down was toward him. So he had to hold the stick out far enough so it wouldn't hit him. And it turned down toward him and went right down to point right down to the ground. And I'm not sure about this, but he looked like he was struggling to keep it from turning.
Right.
And I, of course, thought, this is just such a bunch of witchcraft baloney. And so I went and cut a stick, and I walked where he walked. And this stick that I cut was, I believe it was a willow. It was near a wet area under the power line. And it was a freshly cut stick. And I walked where he walked, and it pulled down. And it's a force. I mean, I know there's a great argument in dowsing that when this happens, it's a neuromuscular thing, that somehow your muscles make it feel like there's this force.
Right.
And I frankly, that's one of the theses. I think it's not true, but I can tell you in my case, the force was real. It was so real, and I tried to prevent it from turning down, that it twisted the bark off in my hands. In other words, the interior of the stick twisted inside the bark to point down. And that, of course, made me a believer. And then I played with it over the years. I've done it with people. I've never formally found a well. I mean, I'm not dug to find if there's really water, but my sense is that the force is real. I have a few other experiences with it that are, for those people who are willing to believe it, will believe it. And then there are a lot of other people who think I'm just spinning a yarn because they can't accept it, right? And so, the thing about dowsing is that I did some research before this podcast, and I read some articles, and there's a long, involved article published in 1982, which is a survey of all the studies that have been done about whether this is verifiable or not. And basically, if you read through all of it, it was a 33-page report, and there is some statistically significant evidence that something works, right? But there's also other studies where they say there's no evidence. And then they get into big discussions about maybe people who can douse or feel this force are more sensitive to gravitational changes. And they've done some studies that show that some people are much more sensitive to small changes in gravity than others. And then there's another thesis about electromagnetic forces of some kind. And then there's the neuromuscular argument, right? And so it's to me, what makes it fascinating to me is, one, it works with me. So I know it works for me, but also to me, what's fascinating to me is that people have yet to explain what this is. And it's interesting, even in this study, which was written almost 40 years ago now, so there's maybe been some subsequent work. I also have an article from the United States Geological Survey about dowsing, basically the same thing, that a lot of people do it. They use it to find light metals, they use it to find water,
Mhm.
Some people claim they can do it, but whenever they do a study, it's statistically a little tricky as to whether it's really true. So it's a folklore wisdom that they think they can trace back to, certainly to the Middle Ages, if not to even ancient Greece, right?
Oh
In
wow.
terms of divining rods. But it's the thing that fascinates me about it is no one's quite explained it yet. And the other thing was in this study that when we talk about the stick moving, like in your case where the rod's turned in your hands, but when you try to fight that movement, right, and it moves anyway, it's
Mm.
just impossible for me to believe that that's some kind of muscular thing that I'm doing to the stick. And I'll tell you, so even more. So then later, and again, I told you guys this before, but again, later, I was with this guy who was trying to dig a well up on a hill in Cape Cod, in the backcountry of Cape Cod. And the way he was digging the well was he was screwing together threaded sections of 2-inch pipe and pounding them into the earth. Not an efficient way to dig a well, but he was building a geodesic dome and he was back to the land. This was in the 1970s, and we all inhaled, and anyway. So he was digging this well, and he'd gotten down below where the nearest pond was, and he hadn't found any water yet. And that was about 80 feet or 100 feet. And so I said, well, Peter, I can find where you ought to dig the well. I've got I'll cut a dowsing stick. And I did cut a dowsing stick. And I walked around, and the stick, sure enough, pulled down not very far from where he was digging his well. And then he was quite blown away by this. And of course, we were altered state anyway because we'd inhaled. So, it was interesting. And so I gave the stick to him, and he walked along, and the stick didn't do anything. Right. So then what I did, and this is again an argument against the muscular thing, I said, okay, Pete, you hold the stick, and I'll put my fingertips on the ends of the stick where they stick out from your palms, and I'll walk with you. So then he's walking, holding the stick, and I'm in front of him with my fingertips on the ends of the stick, walking backwards, and the stick pulls down because I'm touching. He gets very weird. And he says, well, you're probably twisting your fingers. Try it with the insides of your wrists. So we did it again with the insides of my wrists, and the stick turned down. And he threw the stick away, and he wouldn't talk to me because he was totally freaked out because the force had been pretty strong. Anyway, make a long story short, later on, he got way down below where the pond was, and he found a local dowser. And the dowser went out to his property, and the dowser found the water, said it would be 146 feet down, and Peter found it at 146 feet 8 inches. And that's true. And so that made me a complete believer. And since then, this was many, many years ago, since then I've had great fun with many people at different times at work and different places where the subject of dowsing comes up. And I say, well, let's go try it. And we go out and we cut a stick and we walk around. And if it doesn't work with them, and with many people, it doesn't work. You're lucky if they turn with you. For many people, it doesn't work. And then I'll walk in front of them with my fingertips on the stick, and then it works. And they uniformly get really weird. They get really strange. And then, what's even more interesting is when now and then someone will take the stick, and especially if they're very analytical and they think they're really scientific, and the stick pulls on them. Then they really get weird because then they can't figure out what it is. They're trying to figure it out. Is it water under pressure? Is it gravity? Is it electromagnetic? Is it just a myth? What the heck is it? So I've had a lot of fun over the years playing with people, teasing them. And I'll tell you a story at the end of this about this guy I used to fish commercially with, and how we could have found pirate treasure if he'd done what I'd asked, and he didn't. And then later on, we did something else with tuna fishing, but I'll tell you about that. But it was you take people out and show them this thing, and they can't believe it, right? And what I noticed from that, which is kind of relevant to maybe what's happening today as well, is some people, when faced with clear evidence that something's going on, they just cannot register it. You know what I
They
mean?
refuse to believe it.
They refuse to believe it because it's just not explainable.
Right.
So anyway, so I had a lot of fun with this over the years, a lot of fun, and the most fun is with the totally analytical people who are scientific, who this happens and they can't explain it, and then they're out there wandering back and forth trying to figure out why the thing pulls down. It also turns out, and I've had this confirmed by a lot of people, that people also use this to find like metals. And some miners, uranium miners and others, use dowsing rods to find the ore. And I knew a guy who was a friend of my dad's, who was a geologist and geological engineer, who mined for uranium. And he said a lot of uranium is found with dowsing. And then when I worked for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey in the World Trade Center #1 before it was blown up, but there was a guy there, an old engineer, and he explained that when they're out there trying to find buried utilities, which is always a trick, once the city's built and everything. And some people go out with these metal rods, like what you did, and that's how they find where the pipes are. They walk along, and when the rods line up, that's where the pipe is underneath them. And that seems to work. Now, when they do a scientific study, I don't know whether the studies are, honestly, I think most people think this is complete witchcraft, but
it's true. Yeah, they do.
They think it's complete witchcraft and just BS, and it can't be true. And all I can speak to this, because I haven't actually had someone dig to find a well for me, right? But I can speak to two things. I have that the force is real. The force that pulls that stick is very powerful, in my opinion. And I mean, if it'll twist the bark off in my hand, that is powerful. And that's happened to me numerous times. And nobody could convince me that's a neuromuscular thing, right? So there's a force. I don't think we've discovered what this force is yet, which is neat. That's the neat part of this. The other thing is that, back to the guy. So I fished with this guy for many years who was a total character, and that would be worth another whole podcast, but that's neither here nor there. I fished with him commercially off Cape Cod, and he was kind of a treasure hunter too. He'd been treasure hunting down the Caribbean once and never found anything. And he had a friend who wanted to find that pirate ship that wrecked off Cape Cod by Black Sam Bellamy in 1720. And he wanted to find this ship, which had wrecked on the shore because it carried a lot of gold. And actually another group found the ship. We competed with them in like 1981. That's another story. But back then, I said to Sten, who was the guy running this thing, I said, Sten, if you have, this works for like metals as well as for water. If you have some gold coins, we can go out off the beach and with a dowsing stick, and I think I can find it with a dowsing stick, standing in the boat, down. Well, he looked at me like I was completely nuts, right? He had nothing to do. Come on, man, this is BS.
Oh, that's it. Mistake number one.
So I said, okay, here, all right, buddy, we'll show you. So, and at the same time, he had a big party at his house, and he had this guy who was a Wall Street trader who was probably involved with all the computerized Wall Street stuff. And I showed him the dowsing stick, and it worked for him. And that guy spent 5 hours that night going back and forth trying to figure out why the thing pulled down. I mean, it was really important to him. So a few days later, I said to Sten, you really should try to find his gold by dowsing for it. And he said, no, come on, Charlie, that's just, you're nuts. I said, okay, well, do you have a couple gold coins? And he said, I do. And I said, okay, look, I'll tell you what, I'll stay inside the house with you, with Ann, who is his partner or girlfriend, and she can watch me to make sure I don't see you, right? And then you can go out and bury a gold coin somewhere in the ground. And then I'll get a stick and put a gold coin in the end of the stick. And then you wander around the yard, and at some point just wander near where you buried that coin. And let's see if I can find it. Now, before this, I'd gone out and found his well, his water well, right? I mean, he said, "You can't find my well." And I said, "Bullshit, I'll find your well." And sure enough, stick, and I went out there and it went down. He said, "My God, you're there. That's where the well is." I said, "Okay, let's do it with like metal with this gold, right?" And so I put the gold in the stick, right? And then I'm following Stan around the yard, and by damn, the stick pulled down, and there was his coin buried in forest, right? Now,
Wow.
some people will argue that, well, he's sending languages through body language to signal you when it is. And that could be true. I mean, that's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible. Just like people who dowse for water maybe instinctively know where water flows and could figure it out. So anyway, Sten, by then, he still wouldn't go out and dowse for the gold. He was too embarrassed, right? He wouldn't go out and dowse for the gold. And this other guy, Barry Clifford, showed up with a big yacht and John F. Kennedy's son, and they found the gold. We didn't find the gold. These little Cape Cod guys in commercial fishing boats, and he found the gold. It has a big museum now. The guy made a fortune. It was great.
Wow.
But so I always tease Sten about that. Okay. So then we can answer another question. So then I had fun with Stan later, because he always was bemused by the fact that I'd done this, right? And it didn't work with him, but it worked with me, right? So every fall on Cape Cod, the bluefin tuna fish come into Cape Cod Bay, and people go fishing with a harpoon. They go or rod and reel fishing for bluefin tuna fish, and they can catch 1,000-pound fish, right? 1,000-pound fish. So I had to. Sten wasn't catching any tuna fish, but my other friend, who was a good friend of Sten's, Jerry, he was fishing with another guy named Elmer Costa, and they'd caught 3 fish. And Sten called me up and said, "What the hell's going on? I taught Jerry everything he knows about fishing. How come he and Elmer are catching fish and I'm not catching fish? Try to figure out what his secret is," Sten says to me, right? So I call up Quigley and I said, "Quigley, let's have some fun with Sten." So I planned this thing with Quigley, right? So the next day they go out fishing, and it's kind of a foggy day and calm, and Quigley's on the boat, the Columbia, and Sten's on his boat. He's following Quigley around because he wants to know
He's spying on
right?
him.
He wants to know. And finally, Sten comes around the back end of the boat, and he sees Jerry standing on the stern of the Columbia with a dowsing stick. And on the top of the dowsing stick is an empty can of tuna fish. So and then Sten started catching fish. And then he had played a game with us because he said, "Well, you guys had the wrong brand. You had a Bumblebee can, and I used Chicken of the Sea."
Yeah, you had to have the right brand, man.
Had to have the right brand.
So this is, I mean, all of my talking about dowsing is anecdotal and not very scientific, but I believe, just like in the stories that I write, I think there's power in a lot of folk wisdom and maybe some truth in the folk wisdom. And this seems to be one thing that is yet to be properly explained. Of course, so nobody believes it.
Right.
But if you go out there and you try to fight that stick and it'll turn down no matter how hard you squeeze it, there's a force out there.
And I'm glad I spoke to you, Charlie, because next time I go, I'll do that. I'll keep that in mind. I like when it's just another step of confirmation for me. This
Right.
stuff is real. It exists.
Well, it seems to. It's hard to. Of course, you can get into the big discussion about whether strength of belief shared among a lot of people creates a
Right.
truth. I mean,
Right.
it's hard to know, but it does seem that it seems to be well established that people can develop this skill in a way that it's hard to explain, but does find water.
Right.
It does find like metals. And it just thrills me that all the scientific people, just their heads explode when this happens because they can't explain it, which to me is great. You know,
It's like a non-measurable energy. You
Right.
can't measure it.
or it's it may be another. This is my speculation, which is what do I know, right? That
You know as much as they do, though,
there
Charlie.
may
You
be-
might know more because it
there
works for
may
you.
be another. There may be a force that exists we haven't discovered yet. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a gravitational force, there's the atomic force, there's all this stuff. But and again, if those rods turn for you, right, and you go and cut a water-loving stick, you're better off with a water-loving stick than a not water-loving stick. And you cut it, and so it's a Y, and it's, you know, pretty big. You know, you want the arms of the Y of the arms to be at least 12 to 18 inches long, and you want the point to be another 12 to 18 inches big.
Oh,
You know?
okay.
And you hold it, you know, up in your palms. I don't have a stick around here I could show you, but you hold it up in your palms out in front of you, right? And you walk, and when it starts to turn, when you feel it,
You'll feel it, huh?
You'll feel it. And then
Okay.
what you do is fight it. Hold that stick and try to prevent it from turning. I guarantee you won't be able to stop. You won't be able to stop it. You just keep moving forward, and it turns down, and it will turn down.
No, I hope some of our listeners don't think this is silly, but how freshly cut should it be?
Well, I've heard. Well, there's all these subtleties with dowsers, right? One would think intuitively it'd be better to be freshly cut, but some use the same stick always.
Oh, really?
Okay? Other dowsers, like this guy who came out with Peter to find his well, he talked to his stick. He'd ask a question, and then the stick would go up or down.
Oh,
is there water here? And then the stick went down.
Yeah, like a pendulum almost.
Yeah. So some people use the same stick. Some people cut fresh sticks, right? I mean,
just kind of what's kind of worked for you then.
But my instinct tells me that if you cut a fresh water-loving stick, you'll better experience the force of it, because it's green. If it does turn on you, you can strip the bark off the wood because it's slippery. You know, it'll do that rather than ripping your palms apart if you hold it too tight and the bark's really fastened to the wood. Now, I can guarantee you there are probably some of your listeners who are nodding and say, "Oh yeah, of course, this is natural, right?" No, there's others who are thinking, "Where did these guys? What happened to these guys? This is completely. Why do they even have this lion bastard on the?"
Not our listeners.
No, I think, Charlie, that, you know, it's one of those things that you can't explain, but it can't be disproven either, right? Nobody says it's all fake, because dowsing's been around for a long time. Right. So there's obviously something to it. Right. And it's just interesting to hear about somebody that has experience with dowsing. I've never tried it before. So, and James tried it with the rods at his paranormal, and he was like, I specifically used the rods because of you. So
yeah, what Charlie said, I wanted to try them. And now that you said that, like I said, I'm going to try and get a fresh cut before I do my next investigation and see what I feel.
I mean, you could just, it depends where you are, but you could just go out in your backyard and cut a fresh stick. This time of year, it's coming on winter. The sap isn't running as much and everything.
Oh, that's true.
It doesn't matter. You can go out and cut a stick and then wander around your backyard, and maybe it'll turn down and maybe it won't, because the rods work with you. If you know where your well is or something, but and to me, the thing that's so wonderful about this is that for all the things we figured out, we haven't figured this out yet.
Yeah, there's a lot we haven't figured out. There's a lot we have not. Charlie, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing with us. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. It's fun to talk about it, and it's fun to play with it. It's one of the
Absolutely.
last wonders of the world. And so I think it's great. Good luck, man. I can't
Thank
wait.
you.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate
All right, now that we've talked to Charlie, next time I go on an investigation, I am going to take a wooden dowsing rod this time. I'm also going to use the metal ones, but I'm going to do what he says now and try and like stop the movement to see if there's some kind of force behind it.
So your dowsing rods went crisscross.
They went crisscross for yes, or they opened up for no. And at one point they were tapping when we were asking them to count.
Okay. And so the wooden dowsing rod, the stick would have to be pointed straight up.
Right. And
right.
Then the way I understand it and the way I've seen that is, like you say, it's pointing straight up and then it'll twist in your hands towards you.
Right. It will come toward you.
Right.
So that's why he said you got to hold it out way in front of you. So don't forget, James. So don't forget your stick has to be out in front of you, pointed straight up.
Yeah, and he said it had to be at least 24 inches. So
that's uncomfortable to keep your arms like that and walk for a long period of time.
Well, that might be part of it too. I don't know. We'll see. I'm excited.
So where are you going to get your dowsing rod from? Are you going to go make your own, or?
Well, he said just go out in the backyard, so I was just going to go out in the backyard
and make your own. You're going to cut a stick off a tree and make your own.
I am. I'm going to see what's out there and cut one down, and then the next investigation, I'll take that too.
Are you going to try it in your backyard first?
Well, I don't know if there's any water to be found. There's sprinklers, but I've turned the water off for the year.
Interesting. Huh. So when's
and then it's funny though, maybe we could do an episode about the investigation I went on with one of our listeners. That was crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's you. You do all that paranormal stuff. I'm afar. I'll listen to it, but I'm not going. I'm good. I'm over here. Tell me all about it, but I'm not going. I'm a little scary like that. So I'll be
so we'll do our listeners. We'll do an upcoming episode talking about my investigation.
Yeah, we absolutely should. But yeah, so you're gonna have to. And the next time you do an investigation, if you have one, do you have one planned? Do you have one in the hopper? Do you have one like on the books?
I'm not sure. The organization we went with is pretty good about doing one like every month. I noticed they're doing one actually out in an abandoned airfield out in Wendover, Nevada, Wendover, Utah.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm going to go to that one though.
Why?
But because of conflict of interest.
What's the conflict of interest?
I might not want to go that day it's on.
Oh, okay, understood. I didn't know if it was like because it's an airfield.
No, actually, this place is supposed to be pretty well haunted. A lot of activity there.
Yeah, so you like stuff like that. I'm good. Well, yeah, you're gonna definitely have to tell us all about it.
All right, listeners.
And take a dowsing rod.
Yep, I'm going to take a dowsing rod, and I also have video and audio of when we were there. So maybe we could get that on our site somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely try. All right, James, let's wrap it up. So you can go to our website, that's somecrazyshitpodcast.com. You can check out our past episodes, social media, and our blog.
Right on.
Next week, we will have another guest for you. But until then,
keep your minds open, people.